Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special live Monday night edition of the Theology Central podcast. It is Monday, July the 13th, 2020. It's about 7:34 p.m. Central Time. Now, typically, I take Monday off. Typically, after all of the recording and all of the live broadcasts that I do, say on a Sunday, especially this last Sunday, I decide, hey, Monday is going to be a day I'm just going to sit back and do what I want to do. But this morning, I had to take a drive out to the church, to pick up this microphone because I wanted it to have it here for Tuesday and Wednesday during the day because I was going to have the ability to do some recording from home. So as I was driving out there, I was listening to the radio and I heard something and I'm like, okay, I've got to get that audio. I've got to share this with everyone. Hopefully it will spark some conversations. That's what I'm always hoping to do. I'm always hoping to throw ideas out there, to get people thinking, to get people talking. I was really hoping Sunday night, the message that happened Sunday night at Victory Baptist Church, even though it was online, we were looking at one of the most influential churches, and I gave kind of a different interpretation of a passage in the Gospel of Matthew. I really was hoping that was going to spark more discussion. Sometimes what I think will spark discussion, silence, and then something I think, well, no one's going to say anything about that. All kinds of emails. I never know what's going to spark conversation, obviously. Hopefully this will. Now, to set this up, let me remind you of a basic thing I have been saying now over and over and over and over and over again, all right? Right now in the year 2020, the world is falling apart. Craziness is all around us. And I keep saying that one of the things that the church has to keep in mind is that we need to be focused on the spiritual condition of the church, the spiritual condition of the church members. We need to be focusing on what's happening in our world from a spiritual and biblical perspective. We need to have spiritual wisdom, not a wisdom that is earthly, sensual, devilish. We do not need that kind of wisdom. That the church needs to get out, stop, basically fight against the political hijacking of the church, and that we need to look at what's happening from everything going on around us, and we need to really think about it. What's the biblical position? What is a spiritual way of looking at it? And that I believe the church right now is in a very bad position, spiritually speaking. I believe there is a spiritual deadness that has crept into the church. There is biblical illiteracy. There is a problem. And so people are getting caught up into politics and arguing and debating and conspiracies and just so much of the thinking and the talking of Christians it's so messed up. Now, if we start talking about some of the major things happening in 2020, obviously we could talk about the COVID-19 situation, right? And we've got Christians running around arguing and fighting over to wear a mask, not to wear a mask, what we're going to protest, what we're going to do. And again, so much of the discussion is very fleshly, very earthly, not spiritual, not biblical. And that should concern all of us. And we have obviously another major issue in our culture right now is Black Lives Matter. Now, let me make this very clear. The phrase Black Lives Matter, I obviously agree with because Black lives do matter because all people are created in the image of God. Their life has value. There is sanctity to human life. Black lives matter. I have no problem saying that. I have no problem with that statement. I have no issue with that. But there is a difference between the statement Black Lives Matter. There is a difference between that statement and the organization called Black Lives Matter. Those two have to be separated out. They have to be. And when we start considering the movement, the organization Black Lives Matter, when we start considering some of the protests that's turned into not a protest, but into rioting, burning buildings down and chaos, we have to address that. And remember, we have to try to look at this situation from a biblical and spiritual perspective, not a political one. So those are things I have been saying over and over and over again. Well, today on the Glenn Beck program, they got into a discussion about the organization Black Lives Matter. And it turned into a discussion about the church, a discussion about Christianity. And as I was listening, I had so many different thoughts going through my head because so much can be analyzed here. I want you to hear it. I'm going to do a lot of interrupting here probably, but I hope it really sparks a lot of thinking here. Because there is so much here. There is so much here. I'm just going to let them talk. So what we're going, the host of what you're about to hear is Glenn Beck. Just keep that in mind. He's going to be interviewing someone. He'll introduce them. Many of you are going to know who it is, or many of you will know immediately once they mention the name. You're going to go, oh, I know that person. You've probably listened to him. You may have watched his videos. You may listen to his sermons. So this is going to be very interesting. There's a lot of biblical and theological issues flowing through what you're about to hear. And we're going to have to stop and really try to think this through. All right. So are you ready? This aired this morning on the Glenn Beck program, hour number 3. I had just gotten a ham and egg biscuit with no cheese. That's basically my breakfast today. Ham and egg biscuit with no cheese and, a dozen donut holes, right? And a bottle of water. There you go. There was my breakfast of champions. And while I was eating all of that, driving in a car to Victory Baptist Church to pick up this microphone, this is what I heard. And, wow, I had a lot to say in the car. I needed a mic on in the car because I basically didn't want to get out of the car. I could have just sat there for an hour just talking, but here we go. Now you get to hear me, discuss this and, thinking caps on for this special live Monday night edition of the Theology Central podcast. Let's do this.
Woke Shahada. Here to explain it is somebody that I just found online a few weeks ago, and I just think he is so brilliant and his voice needs to be heard. He was preaching here in America. He's from Los Angeles, but he's now the Dean of Theology over in Africa. He's at the African Christian University, also a former pastor of Grace Family Baptist Church. Dr. Vodi Bacham. Welcome, Vodi. How are you?
I'm doing great, Glenn. Thanks for having me on once again. I'm surprised every time.
Yeah, you bet. Are you really? You're speaking truth, and so few people are speaking truth. And I'm very concerned, Vodi, about something that is happening here in America. Actually, the best case of this to highlight.
Now I have to jump in just to let you kind of see the theological context here. Glenn Beck is a Mormon. Vodi Bacham, I think is how you say his name, is well-known Reformed theology. Was a Baptist pastor, dean of a theological seminary, very much in the Reformed camp, at least as far as I know. At least he was at one point. He was right there. And Vodi, so we have someone from a Reformed theological perspective and someone from a Mormon perspective going to be talking about Black Lives Matter and how this all relates to Christianity and theology. So this is a weird mix. Just keep that in mind. Because that as soon as I started, I'm like, wait, here's Vodi, here's Glenn. They don't agree theologically. They're not even in the same universe. I mean, Mormonism and Reformed theology is not in the same universe. You've got one that's Mormonism is not even within historical biblical Christianity. It's outside of that. So this is a weird coming together. So yeah, just keep that in mind. All right, here we go.
Happened in Indiana. A priest got up, spoke a sermon, and spoke of good and evil, and named Black Lives Matter as evil, and actually described why it was evil, and he was accurate. He's now been replaced at his church, and they've got him in some witness protection program or something. And if Catholics and all Christians don't start to stand up, we're in real trouble.
Yeah, we most assuredly are.
Now stop right here. Okay, so Catholic priests, I guess during a homily, I need to find the homily, If you can find the homily and send it to me, that would be great. newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com. I either need a YouTube video or an audio download link, because I would like to hear this homily and see what he said. Now, here's the question. Should Christians, Christian pastors, wherever in Christianity, should from the pulpit they speak against, not the phrase Black Lives Matter, but against the organization? Is that an appropriate thing to do from the pulpit? Do you think is that getting too political? Is that even a political issue? Now, I, from this podcast, have spoken on Black Lives Matter, and I read from their website of how they are opposed to basically the nuclear family, want to get rid of the patriarchy, and a lot of the things that they support, which are clearly not Christian. So should Christians be warned, hey, Black Lives Matter, the phrase, good. Black Lives Matter, the organization, is antithetical to Christianity. So should it be spoken against from the pulpit? If it should, what do you do if your church gets rid of your priest, gets rid of your pastor for doing so? All right? Should a priest or a pastor be removed from the pulpit for speaking against an organization that's antithetical to Christianity? Is it not the responsibility to warn against it? Or do you think that's too political? This is an interesting development. I don't know how widespread this would be. I don't know how many churches would get rid of a pastor now for doing that. Like, this is interesting, and we'll have to see how this plays out. So that's an interesting story. Again, I would like to hear exactly what he said, though, because he may have said something like, did he clearly distinguish between the phrase, this statement, the slogan, Black Lives Matter, versus the organization, or did he not do that? Like, what happened? So let's hear this. And what Glenn Beck is saying, that Christianity, him and Vadi are saying Christianity needs to stand up. Christians need to stand up against this. So that means if Christians are standing up against it, well, it has to be happening from the church and the pulpit. So is that the correct place? Now, again, I am not into turning the pulpit into a political thing, but an organization that is gaining so much power and prominence, whose stated goals are antithetical to Christianity, that is something I think we have to consider.
It's not just happening there, it's happening all over the country. And I've been saying that it would come for the church. It has to come for the church because if you accept critical theory, which is the foundation upon which Black Lives Matter and, all of these different movements is, based, if you accept critical theory and the idea that the world and America is divided between oppressors and the oppressed, if you accept their definition of whiteness, of white supremacy, of white privilege, and everything else, then ultimately you have to recognize the fact that the church and Christianity, in their eyes, is the source of the oppression. So everybody knows that they list off, white, male, able-bodied, cisgendered, so on and so forth, when they're talking about the oppressor, the white supremacist or whatever. Mm-hmm. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Christian is part of that list. And so when they talk about America's original sin, and they see a book by that title, America's Original Sin by Jim Wallace, when they talk about it, they lay that at the feet of Christianity itself.
Now, there's a warning being spoken of here, right? There is a warning. And the warning is that they're coming for the church, and that Christianity is going to be painted as the enemy, that the original sin of America, racism, white supremacy, and that's being laid at the foot of the church. If Black Lives Matter, the organization, is quote unquote coming for the church, then does Christianity not have to stand against it? And if we stand against it, how do we stand against it? Do we stand against it politically? Well, my feelings, absolutely not. We have to stand against it spiritually, right? Spiritually. So but we have to at least warn people of it. Now, do you believe it is coming for Christianity? Do you believe this is hyperbole that Glenn and Vadi is speaking? Or do you believe there is a real, tangible, present threat to Christianity because of the current state of the world in 2020 as it relates. I mean, we got the COVID-19 situation, which is already going to, I think it's going to wreak havoc on many churches. If these numbers keep going up and things start getting shut down, and if things get shut down for a long period of time again, I think many churches are going to start having some major problems. So we have that. And then we got this whole Black Lives Matter movement, this organization. Are they really going to come after the church? Now, I do not like paranoia. I do not like when sometimes I feel like Christians are paranoia. Sometimes I feel like they have a persecution complex, and that anytime anything happens, they're trying to persecute us. I don't like that either. But at the same time, I don't want to just put my head in the sand and go, everything's okay. So they're like, hey, it's coming for the church. It's coming for the church. Now, if it's coming for the church, please note this. If it's coming for the church, I think if it comes for the church, it's going to have to come from within the church. That's where the greatest damage will be done. I mean, if that priest was basically removed, that happened inside the church. That didn't happen outside the church unless there was outside pressure from outside the church that inside the church gave into. And in critical race theory, that's been discussed, talked about. Southern Baptist Convention got involved about, is critical race theory a something that we can use in how we interpret the Bible? I mean, we may need to do a lot more discussion about critical race theory. So I think we need to look for how things come into the church, not the external threat, but how the external messaging, the external philosophy becomes the philosophy of those inside the church. And then they begin to destroy, take down, remove those inside the church who opposes the philosophy. To me, a philosophy outside of the church rarely can do damage until it gets inside the church, and it's brought inside the church via the people, seminaries, pastors, and different ways. So I'm looking at this as like, okay, if it's outside, how is it, like they're saying it's coming for the church. It's going to be the church that brings people down. It'll be the church that transforms itself into something that's not biblical Christianity. I think that's something we really have to need to look at and consider this from maybe a little different perspective than they are. But let's let them continue. I know I've already interrupted a lot. I'm sorry.
And so they have to come for the church. And that's why I believe it's so dangerous, and that's why I talked about this idea of the woke shahada. You have to say Black Lives Matter. I can't believe how many times I've seen people pressed as to whether or not they would speak the phrase. This is dangerous.
So explain, because I feel really impressed to start speaking to Christians. And
I'll stop right here. I'm sorry, but this is just crazy. So Glenn Beck is feeling this need. He's being impressed that he needs to speak to Christians. Wait a minute. He's a Mormon. Now, I want to make sure you realize this. We can sit there and look at the possible threat of Black Lives Matter coming to Christianity. But if Vadi and Glenn are somehow acting like they're on the same page, then the problem of the church is theological, right? Because Vadi needs to say, well, dude, you got to become a Christian before you can speak to the Christians. Like, is he going to tell Glenn that, hey, you're not even a Christian, you're a Mormon? Hello? So I'm a little perplexed. Now, unless Glenn Beck has renounced Mormonism, and maybe I don't understand, but I'm just saying Mormonism, and it's not an attack upon Mormonism. It's just their teaching isn't biblical Christianity. They deny the Trinity. We could go into all the different things that deny. They have the Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Price. They have extra books of Revelation. They have prophets who supposedly give revelations apart from the Bible. I mean, on and on and on, all their history. Okay. I mean, we could talk all day. And I've had Mormon missionaries come to my house time and time again. We have long conversations. And then next thing you know, they're coming to my house with 8-9 people to try to prove that I'm wrong. They misrepresent church history. They get church history completely wrong. And it's always crazy the way the conversations go. But it's just interesting that Glenn Beck, so like, hey, I feel like I need to speak to Christians. Is Glenn Beck perceiving a problem within Christianity that many Christians are not even realizing? That really adds an interesting twist to this conversation. Let's see what Glenn Beck has to say. He's going to say something here that really got my attention in my car. Let's see if it's, I want to make sure it's in this audio file before I tell you what he said.
Start waking Christians up, because I think the black community, because of their relationship with God, and those Christians who are white or of any other color, if they are still attached to God, they are the ones that are going to repair this. Because I think we're in the beginning of the end battle, it seems. We are battling evil at a global scale.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. And this is my biggest problem. I've said this before, and I'll say this again. My biggest problem with this is that we're moving into a direction that says the church is not the answer. The gospel is not the answer. Christ is not the answer. In fact, the church, the gospel, and Christ are part of the problem.
Okay. Oh, man. There is so much to analyze here. It's so much to analyze. Okay. So Glenn Beck is feeling like the church needs to kind of wake up. All right. They need to wake up. Now, Vadi says, okay, yes, we're fighting this battle, but but my fear is that we're going to look, that we're not going to fight it with the gospel. We're not going to fight it spiritually. We're going to look to all these different ways, or the church is going to be seen as a problem. Well, let me take this apart. The issue within the church is the church has completely abandoned the gospel. And when I say the church, not every single one, there's always exceptions. So please hear what I'm saying here. Okay. In general, I feel the church has abandoned a spiritual approach. The church has been politically hijacked. This is what I've been saying over and over and over. The church is biblically illiterate, theologically illiterate. I don't even, if many can really even identify a clear understanding of the gospel. They can't even handle the Bible correctly without twisting it and misrepresenting it and making it say things it doesn't say. I think the church has been so politically hijacked that's why it's not looking to the gospel or any of these things as the solution. It's looking to politics. And so when we are quote unquote fighting evil, the church has decided to fight evil politically at a culture war, not in a spiritual way. And listen, this is not the problem of Black Lives Matter. This is the problem of the church. Now, if Black Lives Matter sees the church as a problem, that's a whole different thing. I want to make sure we see this. We have the internal hijacking of the church. We have the spiritual deadness of the church. And then we have threats mounting outside of the church. But if the church crumbles, it's crumbling from within. That's the issue. So Vadi is right. Hey, the church is he's afraid the church is not seeing the gospel and prayer and those things as the solution. They're looking to something else. But then he mixes that with the church as being seen as a threat. There's an external threat and internal threat. The internal threat started with the political hijacking of the church, the biblical illiteracy and theological illiteracy of the church. So there's layers to this. All right, let's see what they say.
And Black Lives Matter and, their openly Marxist, ideology is the answer. And I know you've gone over this before, but, the idea that these people say we're self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege, right? That they want to uplift Black trans folk, that they want to replace the idea of or dismantle patriarchal nuclear family structures. These things go to the heart of who we are as Christians.
And I would challenge you, go to the official Black Lives Matter website. Go to the official website. Don't take anyone's word for it. Look about us. Look about what we believe, or, I don't have the site open right now in front of me. Well, in fact, actually, I don't have my iPad anywhere near me. Go to the Black Lives Matter website. Look for it yourself. I've read from it in previous episodes. Look at it. The stated goal, the stated things they are supporting is antithetical to Christianity. I mean, they've got the whole transgender thing going, the whole that I mean, that's just a bizarre. It just seems bizarre that Black Lives Matter would want to even get involved in the transgender gender identity issue, because that whole thing states that, hey, I'm a man, but I can just identify as a woman. Well, if I'm white, can I just identify as being black? Is that allowed? Can I just artificially change my race? If I can artificially change my gender, can I not artificially change my race? It would seem like they wouldn't want to get involved in that. But they're basically pushing every idea and concept that is absolutely opposed to a biblical worldview. The nuclear family, get rid of it. This idea of the patriarchy. I mean, all these things they want to bring down. They want to change. They want to disrupt. Those are their stated causes. So as an organization, we need to look at. Now, let's make sure, this is very important. With or without that organization, many of these concepts are already in the culture and people are already moving to disrupt these ideas. And these ideas are already under attack. So I don't know if I see Black Lives Matter as like that. I think the organization, I think we need to focus on the ideas more than the organization. We need to focus through the ideas. Now we can take those ideas and then speak against them from a biblical perspective. But yeah, I mean, their stated ideas are contrary, and I don't. Yeah, is this organization going to find a way to so infiltrate the church simply by the slogan? I don't know. But let's see how they unpack this.
And Glenn, one of the things that I've been saying for a while is I love the illustration of social justice movement, which is really the critical social justice movement, because critical theory is at the core of this. But the critical social
Marxist.
Justice is like a train. It's like a train, and it has multiple cars. And the first car behind the engine is the ethnic car, the racial car, right? Racial justice. And you get everybody, on board with that, because nobody wants to be a racist. Everybody wants racial justice. And then behind that, you have gender equality. Behind that, LGBTQ, AI plus. And then behind that, a whole host of other things that come along with it. And what worries me is that Christians believe that they can jump on one of those cars, right, the racial justice car, and not be carried along where the rest of the train is going. And that's naive.
So why is it we're so asleep, Vodi? What's happened to the church?
I want you to hear that. I almost pulled my car over, because here's a Mormon going, what happened? What happened to us? What happened to the church? Well, why are we so asleep? That's from a Mormon. I keep saying, why are more pastors saying, hey, we need to wake up, we need to go? But during the whole COVID situation, I felt like churches wanted to just argue or prove little political points instead of really saying, hey, we need to really focus on ourselves spiritually. We need to see what we need to repent of. We need to see where we need to really look at each other. But even Glenn Beck is like, the church is asleep. The church is asleep, beyond asleep. I think the church is in a coma. And again, not every single one, but it's like many are just going on with their lives. And what the church is doing, this is just amazing. They want to fight about masks. They want to fight about having a quote unquote a church service in their parking lot, so I guess they can get an offering. It's like the things they want to fight, the things they want to stress right now. It's like the world is in trouble. How about prayer, fasting, preaching, proclamation, teaching, discipleship? Let's do even more of that. It's just this weird situation. And it's just, I thought it was crazy that Glenn Beck is saying, hey, the church is asleep. That's interesting. Let's see what Vadi says.
It's dead asleep.
I think there's a couple of things, Glenn. People mean well. Christians hate injustice. So just think about how ingenious it is. This is what Satan does. Think about how ingenious it is, the way some of these openly anti-Christian movements name themselves, right? Black Lives Matter, well, I mean, who's gonna say Black lives don't matter, right? And now all of a sudden you have an organization that is antithetical to Christianity with a phrase that you feel like, but this is not the first time. Think about Planned Parenthood. I mean, how deceptive is that? Planned Parenthood. Who could be against something called, Planned Parenthood, and so on and so forth? It goes down the line. This is not something new. And so they get to the heart of, again, Christians. We love God. We love people. We hate racism. If you don't hate racism, check yourself. You're not a Christian. We're part of the body of Christ. We belong to one another. And I talk about that in that racial reconciliation mess. And so if somebody comes and talks about anti-racism and you don't know what they mean by that, you're like, yeah, I'm on board with that. And so Christians are being sucked in because they see injustices, right? Nobody would argue that there are no injustices. And so Christians have these injustices pointed out, and they're like, yeah, this stuff is wrong. And it's like, okay, cool, we've got an answer for you. And this answer is based in critical theory. And then what they've done is they've created an entire vocabulary. It's like there's two books I'm thinking about right now and then been talking about right now, Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm. And those two books, unfortunately, we don't even read those anymore. People don't even read those anymore in school. But this is newspeak. They redefine words so that they don't mean what they used to mean. And then they employ those words in an effort to get their ideology in front of us in ways that seem very palatable. And before we know it, we're carried along in something that is actually antithetical to the gospel that we hold dear and antithetical to the goals that we have, that we think they're going to help us achieve.
You bring up 1984, and I started the program today with, let's all remember the slogans of the party. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. And it goes on. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Everything I just reread 1984. Everything in it is happening right now. It is. Absolutely. It's no longer reading fiction. It is reading a newspaper.
Well, but you have to understand, though, that, when you're looking at 1984 and when you're looking at Animal Farm and, these books weren't written as pure fiction. These books were written in order to communicate the truth about this same ideology that has been around for a long time, and we've seen how this story ends. So the beauty of those books is not just that they're good fiction, but they're fiction that really help to illustrate what happens when, Marxism, communism, first, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, right? Then all animals are created equal, and then all of a sudden some animals are more equal than others, and now you got the pigs walking on 2 legs. And by the way, if you don't know Animal Farm, go get a copy of Animal Farm, read Animal Farm, read 1984, because again, these things are very instructive and informative as to these strategies that we're seeing unfold, and people have seen these strategies unfold before. And newspeak is a really important part of this. Redefining terms is a really important part of this.
And Shahada has a lot to do with newspeak, getting it to be accepted. And I want to talk to you about that a little bit more here in just a second. We're with Vodi Bacham, and he is a voice that you can find on YouTube, and you should find him. He speaks truth, and some of his lectures are jaw-dropping. My son-in-law, who is not a guy who's generally into all of this stuff, he was with me, and we were building something, and I had it on, and he's like, "Who is this guy? He is so clear." You really need to look him up and follow him on YouTube. More in just a second. First, let me take 1 minute and tell you about RecTech. Who really understands cooking,
All right, they have their ads put in here, and I don't want to play the ads because, well, copyright, and they may not want their ads advertised here. So I've got to kind of turn this down a little bit and try to listen. So just a very interesting discussion going on here about what's happening, and I don't know how many Christians are being pulled. I don't know how many Christians are quote unquote being pulled into the organization. I think this is how it always works. Culture develops a philosophy and a way of thinking, and the philosophy comes into the church and changes the way the church thinks until the church no longer really reflects a biblical or theological perspective. They've been hijacked without even realizing it. The philosophies of the world always walk through the front door of the church. And what typically happens, you have many Christians like, I don't care about that stuff. I don't care. 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 And while they're saying they don't care, the next words out of their mouth reflect that they've already bought into the philosophy that they supposedly don't care about. Because unless you take every thought captive, well, then that thought becomes your thought, and then your thinking becomes controlled. And next thing you know, your thinking is not, you don't have the mind of Christ. You don't have a biblical perspective. You have a different perspective. You've got to see that if you want to maintain a biblical perspective, which is what Christians are supposed to do, which is a very different way of thinking. All right. I think they're back. We're going to make sure.
So I know the topic of woke shahada is something that you're exploring in the book that you're working on. Can you go in and tie this all up for me?
So one of the things, and there are a number of people who have written on this. John McWhorter is probably my favorite on the religious nature of this movement.
Now, this is what I want you to hear. The religious nature of this movement. Now, this is not true of this is not just true of Black Lives Matter. This is true of so many things. Listen, whenever the world, this is just an absolute theological fact. Because all human beings are created in the image of God, there is a spiritual aspect, because we're creating that image. There's a spiritual part of us. And there's this desire for something more than us, something bigger than us, this desire to worship. Even though we may not want God and deny God, may be an atheist, we're going to replace God with some kind of religious system. We're going to have a doctrine. We're going to have a theology. We're going to have a morality that this is right and this is wrong. And we're going to have a priest, a ministerial class that is the one who informs us. We're going to have a liturgy of what we're supposed to do and not do. Everything does this, whether it's science, whether it doesn't matter what it is. People will always replace God with something. We're always going to replace God with something, and we're going to say, this is important. This is what we should strive for. This is right. It's just funny how people who will reject Christianity will then get all caught up into quote unquote social justice and fighting for these rights. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Where did you get your morality come from? Wait a minute. Does life have value, or are we just evolved animals? And it's like they will almost contradict everything that they've rejected about morality, about right, because that's all judgmental and that's condemning. And then they create a system where they're judgmental and they're condemning and they have a morality and you must follow them and you must do what they say and they get to determine right and wrong. You're like, wait a minute, you rejected all of that and you replaced it with something else, because we always replace God with something else. He's going to argue that Black Lives Matter is done just that there's a spiritual nature to it, that they basically have replaced things that would be in Christianity and they've replaced them. That is an interesting concept. All right. And that now Black Lives Matter is basically this statement you have to say. And if you don't, then you're a heretic to their religious system. Now, again, the statement is okay, but are you supporting the organization or the statement? And now the two are merged together, which is very, very kind of clever. All right, here we go.
They have a new original sin, a new meta-narrative that explains the world and the way the world works, a new commandment, anti-racism. They have a new birth, which is wokeness. They have a new liturgy. They have a new priesthood, which is the oppressed. They have a new eschatology, which is anti-hegemonic hegemony, right? Not just to get rid of hegemony, but to replace the hegemony. And they have this shahada, which is you have to say Black Lives Matter. You have to say that phrase, even though it's a trademark, right? You have to say it. And let me just give you an idea of sort of how this works. It is cultic in its nature. So I talked to you about Newspeak and how they're redefining terms, right? So you thought you understood what whiteness was, but you don't. Whiteness is actually a set of normative privileges that are granted to white-skinned individuals and groups, and it's invisible to those who are privileged by it. So whiteness gives you privilege, and that privilege is invisible. What is white privilege? A series of unearned advantages that accrue to white people by virtue of what? Whiteness. Well, then there's white supremacy. What is that? Any belief, behavior, or system that supports, promotes, or enhances white privilege. So you thought you knew what white supremacy was, right? You thought these white supremacist groups. No. Any belief, behavior, or system that supports, promotes, or enhances white privilege. And again, when you understand how broad that is, you get it. But then what if you disagree with this stuff? Well, then you have white fragility, which is the inability and unwillingness of white people to talk about race due to the grip that whiteness, white supremacy, and white privilege exert on them, either knowingly or unknowingly. So do you see how that encircles you, right?
Yes.
And so there's no way out of it. And this is their theology. And if you object to their theology, then you are supporting racism. If you are not being actively anti-racist, then you are supporting.
Can you tell me the difference between
and white supremacy?
Can you tell me the difference between not being, being against racism and saying I'm not a racist, and the difference between that and saying I'm anti-racist? What is the difference?
Okay, so here we go. So critical theory basically explains it this way, that racism, we used to talk about racism in terms of individual prejudice, individual animosity, or individual acts or individual beliefs about the superiority of one race or over another race. But in the new sort of critical social justice movement, in Newspeak, well, racism now is only systemic. Racism involves the ideas of whiteness, white privilege, white supremacy, and white fragility as defined by the movement, right? That is the essence of racism. So white people, by virtue of their whiteness, are racist. America, by virtue of its historic whiteness, is systemically racist. And so you say, I don't want to be racist. You're thinking about the term the way it used to be defined, which is you and your animosity toward another individual, and not about the systemic version of it, which you have to fight against on a systemic level for the rest of your life.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so when we come back, I want to ask you about that systemic racism and fighting it for the rest of our lives.
This is the Glenn Beck Program.
Holy cow. Nothing reminds you that privacy is a right to truly be appreciated.
We will wait till they get done with their commercial.
For a moment how you'd feel if all of a sudden all the curtains and blinds from your house were
all
gone.
Right. Yeah, we're going to wait till they get done with their commercial, and then when they come back in, we'll join them again. A lot to unpack here, but it fits what I've said. Society will always replace God with something else, and now the new religion, at least in 2020, is this whole Black Lives Matter movement. They have the hierarchy, they have the magisterial authority to redefine terms. They tell you what to believe, what to say. You must follow it. If you don't, you're a heretic. Now, again, that's I'm not talking about the phrase. Talking about the organization.
Keep your information more secure and private when you're on Wi-Fi, not just.
And I apologize if that isn't playing in the background, but I have to hear it. I don't have headphones on where I can hear that. So it's broadcasting from a speaker behind me. So, but we'll see. I wish they would remove the ads from the podcast feed, where I could when I do play these, it would be easy to edit out. Here we go.
If you really think Glenn deserves it, don't forget to vote for him to be in the Radio Hall of Fame. Voting for the audience starts July 20th.
All right. I want you to vote for Glenn Beck to be in the Radio Hall of Fame. He has been pretty influential. It's hard to deny his influence on radio.
We're talking to Dr. Vodi Bakum. He is the Dean of Theology, African Christian University, a new friend of the program, somebody I wish I would have had the chance to meet while he was here in the United States. He's currently serving over in Africa. But he grew up in the United States, grew up in Los Angeles, and has been speaking out about the dangers of what we're facing right now for years, and really came under some real deep attack. And I just think his voice needs to be heard from coast to coast. You need to read him, watch his videos online on YouTube while they're still available. Vodi, we were talking about the idea of anti-racism, and how do you argue with this with people, because you do want to be, our Achilles heel is we do want to do these things, and you sound like a monster when you say no, I won't go there. How do you argue this?
Well, and Glenn, this may seem like I'm going a little off the path, but I think this is an important point, because I get a lot of heat for this because, I've been dealing with these types of things for, 2 decades, talking about secular humanism and postmodernism and then cultural Marxism, when people, sort of rolling their eyes. My first book in 2004, The Ever-Loving Truth, it was about cultural apologetics and thinking about these things on the level of ideas, and these ideas matter. And so a lot of times people think that, I'm either being insensitive. I got a letter from someone who heard me on your show, who just assumed that I wasn't American and that I didn't understand race in America or racism in America. They didn't know that I was born in South Central LA in 1969, and that I was bused, to an all-white school in Pacific Palisades, and that I have seen the ugly underbelly, of racism. They just didn't get that or understand that, right? But these ideas are important. And so what I've been saying is I've been standing on this wall and fighting on this wall for a long time, and sort of trying to argue that these things were coming for a long time. It's not that I don't care about, other issues and real issues that are happening. It's that I think this is the greatest threat. And so there's a book. It's the sort of seminal work on anti-racism by Ibram X. Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And if I can, I just a couple of lines from this, if it's okay. Sure, the opposite of racist isn't not racist. It is anti-racist. What's the difference? One endorses either the idea of racial hierarchy as a racist or racial equality as an anti-racist. Now, you hear that and you go, yeah, racial equality, we're all equal. No, that's not his point. He's not talking about an intrinsic or ontological equality between people. He continues, one either believes problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist, or locates the roots of problems in power and policies as an anti-racist. Now, this is huge, Glenn, because there's an error here. Okay, there's a logical fallacy here. It's called the fallacy of the excluded middle. He creates an either or when there's actually another option. Let me read that again. One either believes problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist, or locates the roots of problems in power and policies as an anti-racist. Well, what about a Christian who locates these things in sin, in the fall of man, whose only answer is the blood of Christ? You see, we're excluded here, you would think, but we're actually not excluded. We're put in the first category of racist because we're not anti-racist. We don't root these problems in power and policies. He continues, One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. Now, these inequities that he talks about, here's one of the things you have to understand, that for the anti-racist, the only explanation for disparities and inequities is racism. In fact, you know, in the book White Fragility, which is, I think it's still like bestseller on Amazon right now, Robin DiAngelo talks about aversive racism, which is, there's so many different types of racism. And when she explains what aversive racism is, the last example she gives is for people to explain inequities by anything other than racism. If you see an inequity between, yes, I'm telling you, this is what these people are doing. And so, again, back to Kendi, there is no in-between safe space of not racist. The claim of not racist neutrality is a mask for racism. So what they're saying is either you accept critical theory's definition of the world, either you operate by their worldview, which excludes biblical Christianity as an alternative. If you don't accept this, then you are by definition upholding white privilege and upholding white supremacy.
Fody, I'm
All right, before Glenn Beck tries to process all of that, let me process it for you. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. The reason this has happened is the world rejects a biblical worldview. They reject the concept of sin. So they reject the concept of sin, but they've taken sin and now make sin a systemic problem in power and money and groups, and that they're all systemic racists, but they don't understand that they don't see racism as sin because they don't have the category of sin. And so what they've said is that category, trying to say, well, no, this is a sin problem. And now that's just being said, well, that's just an excuse and you're just a racist because you're denying systemic racism. No, we are saying that there's a systemic problem in the human race and it's called sin, but the world doesn't understand that because they've rejected it. But here's the issue. Listen to me carefully. Many in the church no longer holds to a strongly biblical understanding of sin and the all of the consequences of the fall. That is why I have spent a considerable amount of time in Romans chapter 5, verse 12, studying the doctrine of sin, because we need, as Christians, we have to have that framework to our worldview. When we look at the world, we look at it with this understanding that every human being is born a sinner and that sin corrupts every aspect of them. Their mind, their will, their desire, their heart is completely wicked. And from that wickedness arises things like racism, pride, and all the other issues. It's a sin problem. And the only way it can be resolved is through a spiritual solution, which is salvation. And guess what? The church has abandoned that and now is looking for other solutions because in many cases, Christians no longer even hold to a true biblical teaching of human depravity. It's either mixed with Pelagianism or semi-Pelagianism or some other nonsense. This is a major theological issue. The world rejects it, obviously. They don't even believe in that category. But the problem is the church has abandoned that teaching, and large parts, you'll hear sermons and you're like, wait a minute, that's denying human depravity. And so this is very important. Let's see how Glenn Beck processes all of this.
I feel impressed to say I am holding the ladder for you, and you are now up on the wall. Say what needs to be said to people who believe they are Christians and doing the right thing by going along with this. Blow your trumpet.
Yeah, here's the deal. Our hope is in Christ alone, and we have to recognize that this movement, this ideology is antithetical to the biblical gospel. not the idea of justice, not the idea of mercy. These are biblical ideas. Justice and mercy. These are biblical ideas, and we want to pursue these things. But we have to pursue these things with the gospel, through the lens of the gospel. And we have to recognize when we're being duped and when we're being used. And when people are giving us their language to use, and when they are pouring into their language different definitions, then ultimately, when you go down their road, you get to a place where you realize what I said last time, which is with this group, a 99 is an F. You cannot do enough. You cannot give enough. But here's the other problem, Glenn. This is works righteousness. This is legalism. Our hope is in Christ. Our hope is not in us working hard enough to be an anti-racist. Our hope is in Christ. And then here's the other problem. The problem is that these people are trusting in systems and in governments. The same government that has let us down on this issue and these issues time and time and time again. That's not the answer. Our hope is in Christ. These people are anti-Christian. This is the mark of the beast for our day, if you will. And so I'm telling people, flee from this stuff. Expose this stuff. Don't be bullied by this stuff. And there's a lot of bullying going on. The University of Colorado at Boulder, and I know you're probably aware of this, but the University of Colorado at Boulder basically said that anybody who does not stand with the principles of Black Lives Matter, not just the phrase, the principles, again, these principles that are antithetical to biblical Christianity, they're not welcome as faculty or as a student.
Well, I know where my kids won't be going, because I think Vodi, I think you're exactly right that this is our mark of the beast, if you will. You cannot take this mark on yourself. You cannot do it. Everything that you've talked about is the opposite of Christianity. When you talk about systematic racism, what you're talking about is group sin. Well, Jesus didn't come to take care of group sin. He took care of the sin of the individual. It was an individual that needed to be cured. You want to stop racism, you change the hearts of the individual. Forget about the group. Everything about this is group. And to me, that is the mark of Satan. It is. Anything that says that the individual is not supreme and not responsible for their own thing, but they're also responsible for everything else is not Christian.
Yeah, and it goes beyond that, though, Glenn. It's not just the group. When you understand these people and their ideology, it is the hegemonic power. It is the not even the governmental system, but this is why, for example, there's a difference between police reform. And it's interesting. I've been talking about police reform for over a decade, right? There's a difference between police reform and defund the police. Mm-hmm. One of those is inherently anti-authoritarian. One of those is an idea of supplanting power. And we've got to understand that this is not just, individual versus group. This is inherently revolutionary. It's always been revolutionary. And so if you just listen to what's being said, we're now replacing what they say is this, hegemonic power, right? And we know that there are principalities and powers. We read our Bibles. We understand that, right? But what they want to do is replace it with another power that has as its helm the anti-racists and those who have been self-proclaimed as the leaders and definers of the anti-racist movement. And that just cannot be. Our hope is in Christ and in Christ alone. We have to let the chips fall where they may.
Dr. Vodi Bakum, he is the Dean of Theology, African Christian University. He is in Africa now, serving there, but he is American, grew up in Los Angeles, and you need to hear his words. You can find him at Voddie, Vodi Bacham, BAUCHAM.org, Vodi Bacham. .org. Vodi, we'll talk to you again. Thank you so much for your help and your knowledge. Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.
Now, wow. So much to say. Now, we've already been on the air. This is supposed to be an impromptu special live broadcast on a Monday night, and here we are over an hour. I can't do anything short. Let me say this, and this is very, 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 very important. What is absolutely staggering to my mind and just blows my mind is this was happening on a secular radio station. If I would have turned the dial from 1470 AM, that's the talk radio station here in Abilene, and I would have switched over to 91.3 FM, which is American Family Radio, which is the Christian radio. Here on secular radio, I'm hearing the solution is Jesus Christ. The solution is Jesus Christ and his forgiveness of our sins and get away from legalism. And we need this. This is a spiritual situation. If I would have turned to American Family Radio, I would have heard we need to vote Republican. And we need Trump. And it would have been the pro-Trump, pro-Republican, get out and vote. And that we need to fight this from a political thing. Democrats are bad. Liberals are bad. And there would have been very little emphasis on the spiritual. Now, at times they mention it, but then they completely circumvent what they said by focusing on all of these, Trump is our savior kind of concepts. It's just crazy. Secular radio now is becoming the place to get the gospel, and Christian radio is becoming the place to get the Republican talking points. What has happened? What has happened? So it's staggering to me. And I know that because I listen to 91.3 a lot just to hear that. And I've challenged people now for probably almost 2 years, listen to American Family Radio, download the app, listen to it from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday, do it for a week, and then tell me if you don't hear what I say. Now, you will hear some spiritual emphasis at times. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that there are times it is so political. So calling the Democrats' name, making fun of Nancy Pelosi, calling these people names, and just conspiratorial thinking. And it's just like, where is the gospel? Where is the solution? And here's Vodi on secular radio saying the solution is Jesus Christ. And but I said, I think there's so much more I want to say, but I'll stop right there because I know it's Monday evening and people got things to do. But man, give me your feedback. newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Thank you for listening to this special live broadcast on this Monday evening. Hopefully you're having a great evening. I know there's so much happening in our world right now. Man, my playlist that I have on my Apple podcast for all these podcasts I've subscribed to dealing with news and world events and current events. Man, it's crazy. The numbers for COVID, all these things happening. Man, there's so much going on. Pray, look after for one another. We need to be spiritually minded. And man, we've got to keep our churches together. Members of Victory Baptist Church, we've got to stay together. Those who have sent checks supporting our church, thank you so much for that. We greatly appreciate that, even though we don't ask. I just want to make sure if I didn't say thank you or send an email to you saying thank you, I appreciate it. And man, wow, what just a crazy time to be alive. A lot happening, but we've got biblical Christianity is in trouble from a lot of different ways, and we just need to be aware of that. All right, I'll stop right there. Everyone have a great night. Thank you for tuning into this special live broadcast. God bless.